Hi and welcome to this week's episode of The Pulse, Regen Strategic's policy and political podcast. I'm joined once again with Libby Lyons and we're delighted to host Emma Garlett today. Emma is Nyungar, Nyiyaparli, Yamatji woman, director of Garlett Group, a 100% Indigenous owned specialist communications and sustainability firm. Emma, welcome.
Thank you so much for having me, Patrick and Libby. It's a real delight to be here and be one of the people that you've interviewed. I saw you've interviewed a lot of really great people, so thanks for the invitation.
Oh, you're most welcome. An esteemed lineup, so we're delighted to have you involved. Emma, can you take us through the type of work that Garlett Group participates in?
I work in a very niche space, Indigenous affairs, so often it's not a core business need for a lot of companies. It's just a nice to have. And it's something that it's not law. You don't have to. So companies don't have to have Aboriginal people that work with them. It's not compliance. Or they don't have to have a reconciliation action plan. They don't have to do these things. So the area that I work in is really companies and governments that want to work to have more inclusive practices, to make sure that Aboriginal people can have a say in decisions that affect them and that they can create strategies which could change their business practices from being traditional areas where it may not have been so inclusive to now where they're creating spaces and opportunities for First Nations people. So in terms of general business, in my area, it's really about companies that want to make a difference and that see the value of having impactful consulting to change the way they work and make it so we have a future in Australia that's better for everybody.
And are you seeing that change in the course of the last couple of years while you've been in operation?
Yeah, so Garlett Group's still startup. It's only been 2 years of trading as of this July. So like any other small business, you still have you have to get a client base or people that believe in the work that you're doing and that see the value in it, that want to engage you. So often it's very different than, say, if I was a small business that was offering core business services. So people that approach us genuinely see the value in that. And there's a lot of data that shows when people work together, when you have diverse teams, it has better business outcomes. So I think there is an impetus for change and it is happening, but it's a lot of people that want to do that work. So they have to have the appetite for it and they need to have their reason why they do it as well. Sure. If they don't have that, then there's no need for it. So a lot of the people that we work with want to make a difference and want to work in a way that's more sustainable and they want to work in a way that's more inclusive. Yeah,
and you reference the fact that it was seen as a niche, or you're acknowledging that it's a niche within a lot of organisations. Do you have an aspiration for that to be more embedded, more close to the core of the way in which organisations operate?
Yeah, I would love it if First Nations people were embedded into the way we do business. Okay. So whether that will happen or not, it's really up to the people that are in those leadership roles. It's up to the boards. It's up to the CEOs. It's up to if there's appetite for it, if they see that they can provide those opportunities. But I hope that in the future it does become more business as usual practice where inclusion and diversity is more common, where you have First Nations people that can make their decisions and have self-determination and provide governance for their own institutions. So I think that would be nice, and I think that's really overdue, and that something like that would definitely help close the gap. It would definitely help Indigenous incarceration rates, children in out-of-home care, because it's systemic. You need to be able to have the change to actually change the outcome. So you have to do it very holistically. So you need to have industry, academia, people that work in government in all areas work together collaboratively to have these outcomes. So it's a long-term change project. I'm not the only person. It's a really collaborative effort. There are so many people, Aboriginal, non-Aboriginal people that work to do this work. And so it's a community effort to be able to make any sort of difference. So the way I like to see it is the new emerging areas like sustainability, clean energy, AI, technology, places and spaces that haven't been created yet include First Nations people in those areas. because there's not systems that have been developed. There's no policies that have been developed. It's not a standard way of operating business.
Yeah.
So you have a opportunity to change that. Whereas if there's already really big systems in place, it's harder to change.
Yes.
Because you have to change a lot of people, a culture, and a lot of ways of working. Whereas if it's new, you can integrate those into the new business models and like future of work.
Yeah. So those new business models, the newer industries in the Australian landscape, or those industries that are nascent at the moment and projected to grow, how are they responding on the whole to, I suppose, propositions by yourself around the services you're offering?
It depends on the company, and it depends on the local government. It depends on who's the decision maker. So, and when you're making a decision, if you're on a board, if you're the CEO, if you're in a C-suite executive, it comes down to your own worldview and your own values and what you see as important. For companies that are listed on the ASX, they want to provide shareholder value and they want to make sure that their profits are high. So unless there's something where it would help the profit margin, then unless they see First Nations as key to that, then it can be harder to show the value and show where your value proposition is.
Yep.
But there are companies that do see the value in it. So it depends on what they're offering. It depends on if there is appetite for it. And it depends if there's diversity on their board as well.
As a result of that, does it tend to require a sponsor at the board level or be executive-led? How do you find the work sort of coming your way and being proposed to the market?
There's no one way. It's a lot of people that want to make a difference and that see a better future than our current state. So I think it's if people are motivated in themselves to say, okay, we want to make systemic change, we want to make a difference, how do we do that? And that's the people that I really want to work together with and that I want to help, because it's so hard if you're trying to convince someone that, you know, they're set in their ways. It's very hard to convince someone because that's their personality. And so for people that are open and willing to make a difference or change the way they work, then, there's opportunities to change, to work with them to have better solutions.
Yeah. Libby, there's some different circumstances, but there's some threads of similarity to, I think, a lot of the perhaps perceptions and maybe some of the pushback that you saw in your time at the Workforce Gender and Equality Agency.
Yeah, no, it's parallel. We're running parallel lives here. I think the point Emma makes about new industry and AI and things like that is really, really important. At the moment, I think you'll find that those sorts of industries are male-dominated. And so systems are being developed and built and goodness knows what else with just that very singular input from men. And so you're not getting that diversity of thought, of need, of idea, which is so, so important when we're developing anything, whether it be, AI, whether it be a new building, whether it be new infrastructure.
Yeah, sure.
You've got to have that diversity in order to build for everyone and in order to be there and drive change for everyone. So, the things are so, so similar. And from my perspective, the only way that you will get change is, it's top down and bottom up. But really, if you haven't got a board and an executive wanting change, being open to change and driving for change, it's not going to happen. It's as simple as that. And I've seen so many organisations that have put great initiatives in place around diversity and inclusion because they've had a chair of the board and a CEO who are absolutely behind it. And then the minute that changes and you get new people in who actually really, that doesn't fit with the way they think or the values that they have, it falls apart.
Yeah.
So, the change that we need is cultural change at grassroots level and working our way up.
The other lever that can enable that change at a systemic level is policy and regulation and legislation. Do you have a view about whether there are particular levers that need to be pulled to change some of those attitudes within corporate Australia or the organisations you're working with?
I think policy is important, definitely, and law, absolutely, it's important. Whether the law will change is really up to Parliament. So I really do advocate for more diversity in politicians and in Parliament.
Yes, okay.
Because then we will be able to have a true representation of Australia and of Western Australia, and then we may be able to get laws that are more for multicultural Australia, more for First Nations people, and be able to help with that. But yeah, definitely it does play a really big role in the future.
I think we have to be careful about over-regulation. We're a pretty regulated country as it is, and regulation is important when it, for safety reasons and whatever. But I think in terms of regulation, I think that there are other ways of driving change. So over-regulation is not the answer in my view. There are other levers that can be pulled.
How does that, I guess, line up with the way in which, say, the WGEA was constructed, the enabling legislation behind that, the mandatory reporting?
So I was a regulator, and the agency is a regulator, but it hasn't. There are no punitive measures that you can take for organisations that don't comply with the law. And I think, there is a role for regulation.
Is that right?
There are no punitive measures whatsoever.
Okay. So you'd be
the most you can
corporate pariah, but you would just be treated as
the most
non-compliant.
you can do is name and shame. So there are all sorts of ways you can get around it, and I think that's that's what I learned very quickly.
Pardon my ignorance. I wasn't aware that.
No. So, but you can get around that. There are other things that you can do to get organisations compliant. For instance, we worked with government departments to ensure that organisations that weren't compliant were unable to receive government grants. That if in order to procure with government, they had to provide their certificate of compliance with the Act and whatever. So there are different things that you can do. And don't get me wrong, regulation is important, but and it can drive change, and it does drive change. But does it drive the cultural change? And I think over time it can, but I'm just wary of us becoming overly regulated.
Sure.
Overly regulated.
Would you be against, like in New Zealand, they have Maori seats in Parliament? Would you be against that?
Well, see, Australia? I don't believe... look, it's a bit like quotas and targets. I will always support targets, because I think targets can be set that can be achievable, that can get workers behind them, really trying to actively make change to meet those targets, because there are all sorts of benefits, and often they're hip pocket benefits. And I think that way you really genuinely drive change. But the minute you mandate something, the minute you do that, you often don't get that cultural change that you need, because if you don't meet that mandate for whatever reason, people become disheartened, they can become angry, they can become all sorts of things, and that to me doesn't drive the cultural change that you need. And I think that you just have to be, again, as I say, I think they can both work, but I think that you only have to look at organisations that have set up quotas, and I use, that they might meet the numbers, they'll meet that quota, but have they got the cultural change that they need? Has there been a genuine power shift in that organisation's, in the power in that organisation? And I think you'll often find that the power shift hasn't happened, that that it's still very unbalanced, and that the power often sits with the men.
Yeah, things like quotas and targets you don't have control over necessarily if they're in terms of diversity and inclusion. Like you can change your policies and your practices and put a nice little blog at the bottom of a job ad that says that you welcome all people and
Sure.
you're inclusive, but it doesn't mean that you'll meet it. I think that you raise a really good point around it. I think anything that you mandate is very difficult because then you need the government to enforce it, and then you need teams, and then you'll have taxpayers paying for that as well, which is another whole challenge to be able to have systems in place that you can't necessarily guarantee if it's not a real compliance issue, like health and safety, for example. So the culture, from my view, to get cultural change, it's the people that need to want to do it, because you can't change people, and they need to be self-drivers of it. Otherwise, people are in the roles for the wrong reasons.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I would say that the laws we currently have, like anti-discrimination, really important. But I wouldn't say you wouldn't go so far as to say you would need legislation to mandate quotas or targets for employment. That's very difficult to do because it's not going to create systemic change. It would definitely create, I think it could just be, throwing the bait out there for people to attack more than anything.
Yeah.
And they would just, yeah.
It has to be driven by each organisation, really.
Yeah.
Because, we regulated with the beauty of the regulation around the Workplace Gender Equality Agency is we now have brilliant data. And when you have data, you can use that data to draw out the practices that will work to drive change. When you've got that data, you can actually put it in front of people and say, well, how can you say this is fair? Yeah. How can you say this is right? So, the data, having data is really, really important. And that was the beauty of the legislation and the regulation behind the mandatory reporting of the Workplace Gender Equality Agency and the data that we now have. It's a world-leading data set.
Yeah. And is it, there'll be arguments about whether it's driving the right amount of change or enough change, but it's at least driving change.
Well, you only have to look at the data. Yes, it is driving change. Yeah. It's probably not as quick as certainly I would like, but it is driving change. And I think the thing about that data is the minute you see things start moving backwards, then you say, what do we do now? This, that's when the red flag goes up. And I think the other thing too that's important is that more data is now being collected under the Workplace Gender Equality Act than before. So it's been extended so that things like people's age, postcodes where they work, all of those sorts of things are now being included, which will give us an even, more comprehensive picture of who's working where and how they're working and the sorts of roles that they have and, who's in power, in each organisation.
Emma, you raised the New Zealand Parliament. Can you see an Australian Parliament or the federal Parliament having a select set of seats for First Nations representatives?
I doubt it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I doubt that Australia, to do that would mean a lot of change to the whole construct of the Australian government as well. So I don't see that happening at all.
Yeah. No, I don't think anyone's jumping headlong into another referendum. We're thereabouts 2 years on from the Voice to Parliament referendum. What have you noticed as an owner of a 100% owned Indigenous business in terms of some of the harder, more definitive behaviours, but also softer attitudes and those societal adjustments following the referendum?
The referendum was a lot of work. I travelled all around Western Australia, advocating and talking to community and talking to people. And it was interesting because a lot of people didn't know what they were voting for as well, which was difficult. But then on from that, it's hard to assess whether the it's really hard to assess whether the referendum has created systemic change, but what it has done is it's raised awareness of Indigenous peoples and the current state. And a lot of people, it's made history really as of another Aboriginal referendum, referendum for Aboriginal people.
Sure.
So it's hard to pinpoint it to answer your question. When I think of it, I think the referendum was great because it was a huge survey of Australia. We still had 40% people vote yes, and there were still people that supported reconciliation but voted no as well. Yeah. So from my perspective, what it tells me is if the referendum happened, if it were to happen in 20 years' time, it probably would have been a yes because the attitudes and the perspectives of people are shifting.
Yes.
If that same referendum happened 20 years ago, it would have probably been way less than 40% of a yes vote from my perspective. Yeah. So I think it would be smart for people in business to work together with First Nations groups and people, especially because 40% of Australia is still quite a large number of people that support reconciliation and supported a voice to Parliament as well. So in the future, I would say that it would be good business practice to make sure that you're including Aboriginal people. Absolutely. Yeah. It's hard to answer your question, just generally, because there's been no research. Well, you can't really tell how much that impacts whether people are doing work in that space or not.
Yes.
I don't know if Reconciliation Australia have data on it or the groups at all.
It needs to be a longer data set, doesn't it?
Yeah, because it's still quite early, I would say, to really and to pinpoint it on that exact point in time as well, when it's probably a lot more that's going on around in the community as well.
Yeah. No, look, I take your point. It's asking for an objective line in the sand, and there's going to be a 20 million odd views that are different and very unique around Australia. How do you balance I guess there's this sort of 21st century need to immediately jump to the next thing, and I'm sure you don't work like this, but occasionally I find myself in this trap. And I think what we've been discussing with regard to, say, that societal change that's slower, more methodical, happens over time, there's a little bit of osmosis. How do you intellectually and just mentally balance that desire for things to improve, but a recognition that it perhaps is going to be a lot slower and a lot more arduous a process?
I think the assumption that it is slow can be quite the assumption that progress is slow in all areas is probably false.
Yep.
Because there definitely is areas that people can work on and make daily decisions where they're going to be inclusive that are quicker.
Yes.
So, for example, in Western Australia, we have the Equal Opportunity Act. If there's a role that really requires a First Nations person, then you could recruit 4 First Nations people into that role. So they're really quick sort of things that you could do.
Yeah.
You could focus on how you learn and engage with Aboriginal people yourself personally, and that could help change. You could go pay for cultural awareness training to help how you think and experience and feel the world around you, and help challenge some of your perceptions as well. There's Nyungar language classes that people can engage in. There's a lot of things that people can do for themselves. And then if people are engaging and learning, then hopefully their narrative and their worldview will also start to shift, or when they see things, they'll say something and maybe challenge the norm. So I think that can be quick. And then people every day in their own workplace can make decisions. If you're hiring people, you can make accommodations for Aboriginal people, like I mentioned, or if you're going to get a contractor to help with work, you could get an Aboriginal business to do the same job. There's so many Aboriginal businesses that do a variety of work across industry as well. So it doesn't have to be... So when people are thinking systems change, yes, it's important, but you can make every single day decisions. There are Aboriginal companies that sell stationery.
You can go as fast as you want.
Yeah, exactly. There's Aboriginal companies that provide services to mining. And so by giving those awarding those contracts to Aboriginal business, it is going to make systemic change.
Yep.
Because you're providing income, you're helping them with their own self-determination, that you're helping the governance of that company. And then as Aboriginal people can build their own businesses, that will just have flow-on effects for the community around them. So I think that the narrative that it always has to be really slow and take a lot of time is wrong, because there is definitely a part of that for sure, but there's a huge part that is in our control.
Your own enterprise, Garlett Group, where was the seed for that? Where did that emerge from?
I used to work as a lawyer, and then I worked in mining, and I wanted to do something that gave back to the community. But the biggest thing for me was my elders were passing away and they were dying. They had been running, and some of them are still alive now, but they're in their golden years. They want to enjoy their life. They want to hang out with their grandkids, and they don't want to keep having to work when they're well into their 70s as well. And some don't even make it to their 70s, so it's really challenging. Yeah. And so when you look at the succession planning, once they retire, who will be able to do the work that they're leading? Will this change continually happen? Who's going to be there to continue in the path that they've created? And they've worked so hard, and for so long, a lot of my family and people before me, they wouldn't even get paid. They don't get paid for the work that they had did when they first started. There wasn't a need for it. Yeah. So now I wanted to work in a space where I can continue on their legacy and keep doing the work. So I really enjoy delivering cultural awareness training to clients, because I find that a lot of people learn, they can talk and say things that are on their mind that they normally wouldn't be able to speak about, and they can challenge some of their worldviews, which I think is important. Yeah. And then the other work, the systems change, it's just a part of the process that we've had so many people fight for a long time. So I just didn't want all the work to be lost, because if no one keeps driving that work, it will stop. And as I looked around, I was thinking, like, who really would want to do this work? It's not the easiest work to do. It's quite challenging, and often you're working with, unless the people want to change and are willing to, a lot of the time you can get a lot of backlash from people, and you're constantly in the firing line of attacks and abuse. Yeah. So to be able to do the work, you need to, be quite you just need to have a lot of emotional intelligence and just not take it to heart, have a bit of a thick skin. Yeah. But as well, at the same time, when you're working with people, you need to be empathetic, and then you need to have understanding, but be able to deliver results. So that's the challenge, and I just learnt a lot seeing it from my parents, and then from my aunties and uncles and grandparents. So I didn't want all their work to go to waste. And that's why I decided, that I should do this work, because within another company, like in major companies, you can only do so much. Yeah. You can lead strategies and try and make change, but it's up to the board. It's up to the CEO whether it happens. So hopefully, and as an independent consultant, you can try and help people understand why they should do it, and then help them have appetite to change.
No, that's really powerful. Fantastic.
You're very resilient.
Thanks.
We're at time, but that's been wonderful, Emma. We really appreciate the
no worries.
Perspectives you've provided. We'll keep you on our running list, so I'm sure we'll hear from you again, hear about the continued growth of Garlett Group. Once again, thank you.
Thanks so much for having me. It's been a pleasure to share my perspectives.